I've used and recommended the same exact library for easily saving player data in Roblox games for over 2 years, but today we're finally switching it up. Now, we're not switching it up too much though, because we're essentially using an upgraded version of the same library. So, the library that we'll now be using for saving our players' data is called Profile Store. It was recently released by the same creator of the Profile Service library that we've used for so long. Now, some of the cool changes with this library include the default auto-save period has been increased from 30 to 300 seconds. And this is nice because it uses significantly less data store calls, which is great for scalability. It's also using the messaging service, which helps improve performance. This library is typed, so there is auto-completion while scripting, and there's a couple of other cool changes in there as well. Now, even though there have been some changes to the library, keep in mind, if you've used the Profile Service library in the past, you'll have a very easy time using this new library as well. There's only a few pretty minor differences while scripting, but we'll cover all that in just a minute. Now, if you use this library or any of the creator's library, with the creator being Lolaris, hopefully I pronounced that right, but they've created all these libraries and maintained them for years. If you've used them and you feel like you've earned Robux from them and maybe you want to support the creator, then I'll leave a link down below in the description to this game where you can go ahead, join the game, and then donate Robux to support them. Now, let's go ahead and hop into Roblox Studio, open up a brand new baseplate project so that we can begin working with this library. Once you have a new baseplate open inside of Roblox Studio, we're going to want to go ahead and publish this game so that we're able to use the API services as well as the data source service. So we want to go to game settings. We'll go ahead and click save the Roblox. Then we can go ahead and fill out this info, which doesn't really matter. I usually disable team create, and I kind of would recommend for you to do it as well, but like I just said, it really doesn't matter. Then you can go ahead and click on save, and after a couple of seconds, the game should be published. Then we're going to want to go back to game settings once again, go down to security, allow HTTP requests, and then also enable Studio access to API services as well. Now that we've done that, we have to go ahead and download the library, and we're able to do that inside of Roblox Studio. To do this, we're going to go to the View tab, and we want to go ahead and open up the toolbox. Then, inside of the toolbox, we want to make sure that we are on the Creator Store tab. The category should be set to Models, and then we're going to want to search for Profile Store, all one word. And you should see it appear right here. If you hover over it, it'll say who it was actually created by, and it should be created by Lolaris. You can also click this button right here and then look at this page to verify it was created at this date. So confirm that's the one that you're using, and then you can just go ahead and click this 2 times. It should automatically insert that into our Explorer inside of the workspace. We can go ahead and close out of the toolbox. Then what we're going to want to do is store this module script inside of a different service, and we actually want to store this inside of the server script service. But let's go ahead and create a folder inside of the server script service, which we're going to call packages. And then we're going to go ahead and drag this module script inside of that folder. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the term packages is a synonym for libraries, modules, or things like that. It's essentially a folder to store modules at where all the logic is written by other people. Instead of using the word library, it's more common to use the word package inside of the Roblox community. And also, you probably see some services inside of this video which you might not see in your own Explorer, like the plugin GUI service or a couple of other different ones. Just completely ignore them. I have a setting toggled on inside of Roblox Studio which makes these displayed, which I should have probably disabled before making this video, so my apologies if that confuses you at all, but like I said, you can simply just ignore them. Now, when we use this library, the way that we go about using it actually requires us to create a table which we'll use as the default player data. Now, while that might sound complicated, it's actually extremely simple. Let's go inside of the replicated storage, and we're going to go ahead and create a brand new module script. We'll go ahead and rename this module script to be called player data. Now, inside of this module script, the first thing I'm going to do is rename this module variable to be called shared, because that's just how I like to have mine set up. Then what we're going to do is add a variable to the shared table, which we're going to type it out in all capital letters because it's a constant variable and it's never really going to change. So we're going to go ahead and call this default underscore player underscore data. And like I said, it's going to be set equal to a table. And now inside of this table, we're going to store key value pairs to make up the player's data. Now let's say in our game that players are going to have 2 currencies attached to them. So they're going to have coins and they're also going to have gems. So we're going to go ahead and create a key value pair, which will say coins as the key, and then we're going to set that equal to 0. This means that when the player joins our game for the first time, they're going to start off with having 0 coins. Then we'll also add gems to this table as well, and we'll set that to 1,000, meaning that when the player joins the game for the first time, they'll have 1,000 coins. Cool. And now that we've done that, we're also going to create a type for this. And if you've never worked with types, you can kind of ignore this. It's not even a big deal. It's just sort of something to help you with scripting. So we're going to create a type for the actual player data. And like I said, the reason that we're doing that is because it makes it a lot easier for us while we're scripting. And you'll see that a little bit later in this video. But let's go ahead and create the type by saying export type. And the reason we're using the keyword export is to make this type accessible to other scripts which require this module script. And the name of this type is going to be called player data. And then what we're going to set this equal to is we're going to use the keyword type of, which which is actually a function, and then we can go ahead and pass through shared.defaultPlayerData, and that'll actually turn that into a type for us automatically. It's something that Roblox actually implemented pretty recently, the type of function here, and it's really cool and really useful. Now, with that being said, we're done inside of this module script, so we can go ahead and collapse the replicated storage. And next, what we're going to do is start writing all of the logic on the server side for loading the player's data and also managing it as well. So inside of the server script service, we're going to want to go ahead and create a brand new module script, which we're going to go ahead and call player data. And similar to how we saw me update the last module variable, we'll also do that again here. So we'll go ahead and rename this to be called shared. And then I'm also going to create another variable above this, which is going to be called local, which is also going to be set to a table as well. Now, if you're a new viewer, you might be kind of confused by how I'm setting these certain things up. I would recommend that you might want to check out the module framework video that I have, because that really goes through and explains how I structure my modules and why I set them up the way that I do. But even still, it might be a little bit different, but it still should be simple enough for you to follow along and continue through this video without having to watch another one or without me having to even explain it. Anyways, we're not going to do anything with that local variable yet, but we are going to create a couple of variables towards the top of our script, which are for a couple of the different services that we'll be using. So we'll first create a variable called players, which is going to be equal to the player service. So of course, game get service, and then we want to get the player service, and then we're going to want to get 4 more services. The next service that we're going to want to create a variable for is the replicated storage. We also want to get the run service, and then finally, we're also going to get the server script service as well. Then what we want to do is create a variable for the player data module that we created inside of the replicated storage. So we're going to create a variable, and we're going to call this player data template, and we're going to set that equal to require replicated storage.player data. In addition to that, we're also going to want to go ahead and require the profile store module from inside of the server script service. So we'll create a variable called profile store, which we'll set equal to require server script service dot packages dot profile store. And now we've required the profile store module. Then after that, we're going to want to create a variable, and the name of this variable is actually going to be in all capital letters because it's going to be a constant variable, meaning the value of it shouldn't change. And actually, technically, it's not really a constant because we are going to change it, but that's besides the point. Anyway, this variable is going to be called data underscore store underscore key. And we're just going to set this to a string, and we're going to set this to the word production. Now, essentially, this is the data store key that's going to be used by the profile store library anytime the game starts up. So if we change this key to something different, then that's essentially how we're able to clear all of the player's data. You can think of the string as telling the profile store which database to look at. So if we say production, then all of our data is going to be saved inside of production. And if we were to change that around, then it'll be sort of looking at a new database. So if we change this to production 2, it'll look at the production 2 database. But if we change it back to production, then it'll load all of our old saved data as well. So it's not like changing this makes us lose any data. It just makes us kind of look at a different database, for example. Then below this, what we're going to do is create an if statement, and we're going to check if this script is running inside of Studio. So we'll say if run service, and then we'll use the method is studio. And if we are running this inside of Studio, then what we're going to do is actually change the data store key to test. And the reason for that is that while we're working on our game inside of Studio, working with a different data store or a different database will prevent us from doing anything to the production database, which is where all of our actual player data is saved and stored at. Now, you don't need to do this, but like I said, it's a lot safer to do it this way rather than working with the production data while you're inside of Studio. Then after that, we're going to go ahead and basically start off by loading the player's data and creating the player store. So we're going to go ahead and create a variable called player store, which is going to be equal to the profile store, and then we'll use a function of it called new. Then we want to go ahead and pass through the data store key as well as the player's data template. So we'll say player data template dot default player data. Then after that, we're going to create a variable called profiles, which we can specify the type of this to be a table. And for the keys, we're going to be using players, where for the value, it's going to be a little bit different than something you're probably used to. But again, we're going to use the type of function, and then we're going to go ahead and pass through the player store. And then we're going to pass through a method of it called start session async. And then we're going to set that equal to a table. So while this might seem a little bit confusing, essentially all of the players' profiles are going to be stored inside of here. So after we load a player's profile, then we're going to store them inside of this table with the key being that player and the value being their profile. Okay, so then between the shared variable and where we return shared, what we're going to do is go ahead and create a brand new function, which we'll add to the local table. And this is going to be called load profile. Now this function is going to have a single argument, which is going to be the player whose profile we want to load. So inside of this function, the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and create a variable called profile. Now to get the player's profile, we're of course going to go ahead and use the player store. And we want to use a method of it called start session async. Now we need to go ahead and pass through the player's profile key, which is similar to the data store key. but instead of pointing to a different database, this would just kind of point to a different piece of data, for instance, that's stored inside of the overarching database. Now, we want to go ahead and make sure that we actually pass through the player's user ID, because that's how we're going to go ahead and make sure that each of our keys are unique and tied to the specific player so that we can save and pull their data separately from other players. Then there's actually a second optional parameter that we can include here, which is a table. And inside of this table, we're going to create a key value pair. For the key, we're going to say cancel. And for the value, it's actually going to be a function. And with this function, what we want to do is we want to say return player.parent does not equal the player's service. Now, like I said, this is optional, but if we include this function, then the library will use this function several times to determine if the profile session is still needed. So when we call this function, it's going to try to load the player's profile a bunch of times until it actually does, or until it is actually told to cancel out. And it probably also times out after a certain period of time as well. But let's say that the player joins our game, and then right after joining the game, they leave the game before their profile was actually even loaded. By using this, we can determine if the player has left by checking if the player is parented to the player service, because if not, then we know that the player has left their game, and we don't need to try to grab their profile in this server anymore. Cool. So after that, what we're going to do is we're going to check if the profile variable equals nil, because if it does equal nil, then what we want to do is actually kick the player from our game. So we're going to say return, because we actually want to stop this function right here, and then we're going to go ahead and say player, and then we'll use the kick method of it, and we can go ahead and pass through a string here if we want to give them a custom message, which we could just say profile load fail, please rejoin. And the profile should really only be nil. So anything that we write past here, we know that we actually have loaded the player's profile. So now that we know that we've loaded the player's profile, aka their data, we need to do a couple of things to it. First, what we're going to do is we want to actually use the add user ID method to it. And this will actually link the player's user ID to this profile, which allows us to comply with the GDRP erasure requests. Then we want to go ahead and use another method on this, which is called reconcile. And what reconcile does is it actually updates the player's profile with any data that's missing from the data template that we created. Let's say that we add a new currency to our player data template like wins. The reconcile function will cause all the outdated profiles when they join the game to then be updated to include the new key value pairs of our template, which is very important and prevents a lot of issues that could occur while we're scripting. Then, after we've done those things, we actually want to go ahead and listen to an event on the profile, which is called onSessionEnd. Then we'll go ahead and connect that to an anonymous function, which won't have any parameters. Now, this event is called when the game shuts down. Another server tries using the profile because the player might have left and rejoined, or if we use the end session method, which we'll actually do soon. So whenever a profile session has ended, what we want to do is go ahead and remove the profile from the profiles table. So we'll index the profiles table with the player, and then we'll go ahead and set that equal to nil. And then we also want to make sure that we kick the player as well, because if their profile session has ended on here, then they definitely should be gone from the game. And you could include a message here, which we could say something like profile session ended, please rejoin. Then after that, we want to go ahead and create a variable called isInGame, because we want to make sure that the player is still in the game. So we'll say player.parent equals players, and as long as this is true, so if is in the game, then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add the player's profile to the profiles table. So we'll say profiles, we'll index that with the specific player, and then we'll set that equal to the player's profile. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and say else, and if the player is no longer in our game, then we're going to go ahead and end their session. So we'll go ahead and call the end session method on that profile. Cool. So now we've actually done everything that we need to do inside of the load profile function. The next thing that we want to do is actually use this function. So above this function, we're going to create another function, which again is going to be part of the local table, and it's going to be called onStart. Now this function is not going to have any parameters, and this function is going to be called a single time when our game starts up for the first time, basically. So let's go all the way down to the very bottom of our script, and let's go ahead and actually call that function to make sure that it is called. So I'll just say local.onStart towards the very bottom. And now inside of this function, what we want to do is we want to load all the players' profile when they join our game. So we could say players.playerAdded :connect, and then we can just connect that event directly to the local.loadProfile function. Now, in addition to loading the players' profiles anytime they join the game, we also want to iterate through all the players who are currently in our game, because maybe some players were actually able to join the game before the script finished loading. So what we'll do is we'll say for _player in players :get players do. And then we're going to say task.spawn, because the load profile function can actually stall. So we want to avoid that function stalling. So we'll say local.loadProfile, and then we'll go ahead and pass through the player to that function just like we did right here. And the reason that we don't need to use the task.spawn for the player added event is because events naturally essentially when they call a function, they actually pretty much use task.spawn, but in an invisible way. I feel like it's kind of the best way to describe it. But cool. Now, when anybody joins our game, their data will be loaded. But now we also need to do something when the player leaves our game as well. So below the load profile function, we're going to create another function, which is again going to be part of the local table. And this is going to be called remove profile. And it's going to have a single parameter, which is going to be a player. Now, when this function is called, what we want to do is try to get the player's profile. So we're going to say profiles and then index that with the player. And now if the profile does exist, so if it doesn't equal nil, then what we're going to do is go ahead and end their session. Just like that. So then let's go back to the onStart function. And when are we going to call this? Well, we're going to go ahead and call this whenever the player is removing. So we'll go ahead and say :connect, and then we'll go ahead and connect that to the remove profile function. So now anytime the player leaves the game, their profile will definitely be removed. So that's pretty much everything that we actually needed to do inside of here. But now I'm going to create two more functions to help you understand how to actually work with the player's data. So towards the bottom of our script, we're going to go ahead and create another function, which is going to be part of the shared table this time, so that other scripts which require this module are able to use these functions. And this function is going to be called getData. Now it's just going to accept a player as a parameter, and we can even specify the type that this function will return, which is of the player data template .player data type. And we can include a question mark there because we can't guarantee that we are able to return a player's data in case their profile might not exist. Then the first thing we want to do inside this function is go ahead and create a variable for the player's profile. We can do that by indexing the profile's variable with the specific player. Now, if we don't get the profile, then we're going to say return n to stop the function right there. But otherwise, we're going to go ahead and return the player's profile.data. So yes, the data property of a player's profile is actually where all their data is stored. If you try to index data with a period, you can see the autocompletion suggested to us. We're able to modify the player's coins or their gems, for example. But now what we're going to do is create another function, which is also going to be a part of the shared table. And this is going to be called update coins. It's going to have two parameters, the first being the player whose coins we want to update, and the second being the amount, which is a number, and that's how many coins we want to modify the player's current coins by. Now, first things first, inside of this function, what we want to do is go ahead and get the player's data. So we're going to go ahead and create a variable called data, which is going to be equal to shared.getData, and then we're going to go ahead and pass through the player. If we don't get their data, then what we're going to do is return n to stop the function right there. But now let's go ahead and create a variable called coins, which is going to be equal to data.coins. Then we can go ahead and print, and what we're going to go ahead and print is player had, and then we'll display the amount of coins that the player did have. So then after that, let's go ahead and increase the player's coins by the amount that was given to us. So we'll say data.coins plus equals the amount. Then we'll create a variable called new coins, which is going to be equal to data.coins. And then we'll go ahead and print once again, player now has, and then we'll print new coins. Just like that. And then also, if you want to, you can also print out the player's full data as well. So you could even say shared.getData, pass to the player, and then you can print out their entire data table as well. Realistically, all of this is for demonstration purposes. Normally, you wouldn't actually do this, but I'm trying to make it as clear as possible. But okay, now that we've created both of these functions, let's go ahead and actually use them. And we're going to use them from another script. Because remember, when we started making this script, we made the player data script a module script. So for a module script to ever actually run, it needs to be required by another script. So inside the server script service, we're going to go ahead and just add in an ordinary script to this, which you can rename this to be called whatever you want. I'm just going to rename it to be called test. Then we'll go ahead and create a variable called player data, and I'm just going to name this player data service. And we're going to go ahead and require a player data module that we just created. So we'll say require script.parent, which takes us to the server script service, and then we'll go ahead and require the player data module just like that. And now actually above this variable, we want to create another variable for the player service. So we'll say game get service players just like that. And then what we're going to do is create a while loop. So we'll say while true do, and then we want to iterate through all the players who are currently in our game, and then we'll go ahead and increase their coins. So we'll say for underscore comma player in players get children do, and then we'll go ahead and use the player data service module. We'll use the update coins function. We'll pass through the player, and then we'll also pass through just say 100 to increase their coins by 100. And then after the for loop, we'll go ahead and say task.wait1, so that we're increasing their coins by 100 every single second. And now that we've done that, we can actually go start up our game and test this out. So once we get into our game, we can look in the output to actually see what's happening. So the player starts off with 0 coins. Then we increase their coins by 100, and then we can see all their data is actually printed out right there. Then the while loop runs again. So we then have 100 coins, we increase by 100 once again, and then we can see the updated data here as well. And we can see that this is just going on and on and on. Now, if you're still struggling with using this library, like I said, it's pretty much identical to what we've already been using this entire time. So I would definitely encourage you to go back and watch some of my previous videos on this topic. I'll leave some very specific links in the description to videos that I would recommend that you watch if you feel like you are struggling with this. My most recent simulator series uses the profile service, which like I said, pretty much the exact same thing as this. And then we also have some videos related to the module framework, which also also use the profile service as well, so it kind of just shows you another way to kind of work with the data and do different things like that. Like I said, I was trying to make this video sort of a quick way to demonstrate how to use the updated library, because not too many things have actually even really changed. Also, at the same time, I would really recommend that you check out the official documentation, because in my opinion, the documentation is really easy to learn from. I think the creator did a great job with it. And in the documentation, they explain a lot of things and give a lot more details as to why things work the way that they do, because it's all written by the creator. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be it for this episode. As always, if you did enjoy, make sure you smash the like button. Please leave a comment down below letting other people know that it did work. I and they really do appreciate it. It helps everyone out. And as usual, if you want to gain access to all the scripts and the game file that we made during this episode, as well as a ton of other assets, you can visit MonzterDev or my Patreon, link down below in the description to both of these. You can gain access to a ton of assets to easily create your next Roblox game, as well as support me in creating all the content that I create. Anyways, with all that being said, I hope that you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.